Nowadays, there's a lot of science when it comes to arrows and how you set them up, along with a lot of accessories that are available for you to actually change the characteristics of the arrow and whether you're shooting at short distance, long distance, if you're trying to penetrate. So I'm going to go through step by step and teach you how to actually find your front of center arrow, the FOC of the arrow, its balancing point, and then accessorizing it to optimize for the greatest penetration and arrow flight downrange. Remember, everything about an arrow is basically black magic. So we're going to go step by step and teach you how to find the FOC of an arrow. Now remember, there's a lot of stuff that we can do. And we're talking about the master and the slave and what it means and why we're actually going through the steps to teach you what FOC means, because ultimately we need the right amount of weight in the front of the arrow in order for it to fly right through the air, how much fletch we use in the back of it to determine whether the back of the fletch is actually steering the arrow or the front point weight and the back of the arrow is just chasing it, how it reacts in the wind long distance as well as penetration, and the accessories that you can change up on the arrow, and the relationships between the weight at the rear of the arrow and the front of the arrow. So the very first thing we need to do is find the FOC. So we're going to go ahead and mark that through a balancing act. Well, the first thing I do is I make sure that I have my hunting broadhead before I do any calculations or any math on the arrow itself. So now we're going to find the front of center. I'm going to go ahead and use this kind of a balancing board on these bearings. FireNock builds this really trick spine aligned machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the balancing act, and I'm just going to keep moving this arrow until it just balances out. Super, super close right here. Okay, now that I've got that kind of balanced, I'm going to go ahead and just move this back by a smidge. It is ever so minute. Now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to mark this right here on the shaft. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab a tape measure real quick, and I'm going to measure the overall length of the arrow, and from tail to tip. Now a lot of people will do that from the crevice in the inside of the nock where it actually reached the string, but I'm going to use the overall total length, which is right at 30 inches. So now what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to measure in 15 inches, and I'm going to go ahead and mark the shaft. Okay, and that is right here. Now that I've got a clean 15 inches, these are spine aligned arrows. I love these things. This VAP is an arrow that I've been hunting with over the last 3 years, and for me it's the most unbelievable shaft ever built. It's super tough, it's small diameter, it penetrates really well, it's got a nice coating on it, it's got a lot of accessories that allow you to change the FOC to be able to dynamically tune your arrow for what it is you want to do. And spine alignment is super important, and we have some other videos that will describe that in detail. There's just so much technology around an arrow today that you really got to start paying attention. Okay, so now guys, we got it marked halfway through the arrow, the overall length, and we've got halfway through, and then right here we've got our spot where the arrow physically balances. Now what we're looking for is the percentage, okay, over the whole length of the arrow, and then from the center to this spot. So what we're going to do now is we're going to measure the distance between these two spots. We're going to take that same tape measure, and we're going to go ahead and measure that between the two of them, and we're right at basically 3 1/4 inches. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and make a calculation. All right, now we're going to do the simple math. Now again, 3.25, the distance between the balancing point and the center of the arrow. So 3.25, okay? And then we're going to divide that by the overall length of the arrow, which was 30. And then we're going to times it by 100 to move the decimal point, and equals 10.8. We're at 10.8. That's the amount of FOC that we have on this arrow. Now anywhere from about 8 on the light side, okay, and if I wanted full guidance and I wanted lots of penetration, I could go up to about 18%. Now remember, I shot an elephant with a 1260 grain arrow with a 26% weight forward. Now that's excessive. And remember, the more point weight you have, the more likely is the arrow to actually bomb. So there's a percentage that we're really looking for on a hunting arrow with the amount of pounds we're pulling, with what the arrow overall weights, the difference between momentum and penetration and speed, all have a factor. So there is no like exact recipe on finding the perfect FOC. Now with my 100 grain head, with my arrow that I typically shoot with an aluminum insert, I'm at 10.8. Now anywhere that if I really wanted to try to shoot some heavy game, if I wanted to go to Africa and I was shooting buffalo, I might want to be, up around 12 to 15%. Now, getting the arrow to fly correctly can be difficult, and accessorizing the arrow in order to get the proportion amount of weight on the front or the tail can really change the way that your arrow flies and penetration. Now, this arrow in particular, it's complicated because when it comes out of the bow, it physically noodles. It's apexing in order for it to correct itself. So the spine of the arrow is super important, which is the overall rating with the poundage that I'm actually shooting. And then I also want the front of that arrow to carry the right amount of weight. Now, if I still wanted to shoot that 100 grain head, one of the things that I could do is to change the insert. Now, this is an outsert insert, a penetrator adapter, the distance between where the shaft goes, and then it comes up to the actual outside diameter of the broadhead itself. But this broadhead I believe in, and I want to keep it the same. So I don't want to change my broadheads or my flight characteristics. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a stainless steel insert down at the end of it. Now, there's a lot of choice in different broadheads, and manufacturers are actually working on FOCs to improve the penetration overall. So we've been able to shoot less poundage with more penetration by just changing the dynamics of it. Now, on the other end of the arrow, there's a lot of things that can happen. Now, one of the ways I could do it to change small percentages, I could actually take the fletch and I can move it forward. Now, that might have a little less control. I could also change the weight. I mean, obviously this long feather with more helical would control the arrow to spin it faster to slow it down and also have more control on the end rather than in the front. Or if I took a typical blazer vane like this one is exactly 6 grains times 3 on the back of the arrow. Or if I wanted to increase it and use something that has more control, that's a little bit stiffer material that actually has some lift on it, like the Fire Knock builds, this fletch right here actually is 8 grains. And then the other thing I can do is I can actually look for different types of nocks. And so this is a big difference to change the FOC on the back of the arrow to counter the front of the arrow. Now remember, an arrow is actually fighting for control. How much helical I put on the back of the arrow, how big the profile of the fletches are, where they are in position, along with the amount of weight that's in the back, has everything to do with the front of the arrow and whether it's stable. Again, if we have too little weight up front and we've got a lot of stabilization in the back and it starts to correct itself, then it starts to waddle. It doesn't have enough contained weight in the front of the arrow in order for it to stabilize. It's going to take a lot longer. If the weight balance between the front of the arrow and the back of the arrow are balanced and it's the right amount, they're going to work together. It's just the right amount of weight in order for it to stabilize to push against it. The arrow goes in full gyro and it sends an arrow in a perfect line, in a perfect cast, spending the majority of that energy being able to not have so much front weight that it wants to dip down and hit the ground, but it will carry a long distance, and when it arrives, it has a tremendous amount of kinetic energy and momentum all capitalized in an arrow. So again, changing your FOC and looking for those accessories can make you a better archer, and you can decide what you want the arrow to do and to maximize whatever you're trying to do, whether it's accuracy or penetration. Now remember, one video can't capture everything, so the next video in line is to check your spine. What that means, arrow selection, as well as fletches and the degree of them in order to get perfect arrow flight. So again, it's all black magic, but picking the right thing and having enough knowledge and caring about what you shoot is the recipe in order to become a better archer.